Welcome to In Solidarity, a Seva Cooperative Federation podcast. Seva Cooperative Federation has been working for over 30 years to economically empower women in the informal sector through worker-owned cooperatives and collective enterprises. To put it quite simply, we work as a women's enterprise support system to promote and strengthen grassroots women's enterprises. Through this series of podcasts, we hope to cover themes that are of importance to informal women workers and their cooperatives and collective enterprises, and how we can create an enabling environment for women's enterprises to thrive.
अभी तो बहुत बड़ा सपना है हमारा।
मार काम नहीं बहुत जरूरत है, मैं मना ले जाऊँ।
अब हम लोग के पास कैपिटल आ गया, अब हम लोग खुल के करेंगे बिजनेस।
સમયમાં તો જોવા જઈએ તો આપણે બધો કામમાં જ સમય જાય છે, પોતાના માટે સમય કાઢવો બહુ મુશ્કેલ હોય છે।
अभी हम लोग मतलब ये पैसा राउंड होते होते हम लोग 12-13 लाख का बिजनेस चल रहा है।
You've tuned in to In Solidarity, a Seva Cooperative Federation podcast. Hina Ben, board member of Abodhana Handicraft Cooperative, a women's craft cooperative in Ahmedabad, says,
મારે કામ માટે ફોટોની જરૂર હોય છે। મારી પાસે સ્માર્ટફોન નથી અને સ્માર્ટફોન ન હોવાને કારણે મારા હાથમાંથી ઘણીવાર એવું થયું છે કે ક્લાયન્ટ છૂટી જાય છે અને મારું કામ અટકી પડે છે। તો હવે એના માટે મેં એ સોલ્યુશન નીકાળ્યું છે કે મેં મારા હસબન્ડનો નંબર બધા જે ક્લાયન્ટો છે એમને આપી દીધો છે। તો એમને જ્યારે સાંજે ઘરે આવે ત્યારે હું એ ફોટો જોઈ અને પછી મારું કામ કરું છું।
And I quote, "Because I don't own a smartphone, it affects my work. I am unable to take photos of embroidery samples and send it forward to the artisans. I have to rely on my husband when he comes home in the evening to be able to do this." End quote. This is not just the case with Hina Ben, but with thousands of informal workers in India. Economic status, informality, caste, religion, urban versus rural add several layers to this conversation about access to technology. However, the question is not only one of access, which is no doubt important, but also a lack of digital technologies that are designed for women, especially in the informal sector. Sangeeta Ben says,
અમે કોમ્પ્યુટરનો ઉપયોગ કરવાનું શીખવા માગીએ છીએ જેથી અમારે બીજા પર નિર્ભર ન રહેવું પડે, કારણ કે મોટાભાગના પ્રાથમિક ભાષા તરીકે અંગ્રેજી છે અને ઇન્ટરનેટની પ્રાથમિક ભાષા અંગ્રેજી છે તે ક્યારેક અવરોધ બની જાય છે।
and I quote her, "We wish to learn to use a computer so that we don't have to depend on others. Currently, because most gadgets have English as a primary language and the primary language of the internet is English, that sometimes becomes an obstacle." End quote. The COVID-19 pandemic was a triple crisis for informal women workers of health, livelihood, and additional care. While there was a digital transformation happening in the world with a structural shift towards e-commerce and digital payments touching 100 million payments per day, women in the informal sector were left behind. Joining us on this episode to discuss the great gender digital divide and the opportunities that the digital economy could offer informal women workers and their cooperatives and collective enterprises is Anita Gurumurthy. Anita is a founding member and executive director of IT for Change. She leads research on the platform economy, data and AI governance, democracy in the digital age, and feminist frameworks on digital justice. Welcome, Anita, and we're absolutely delighted to have you on board as a guest for our first episode.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine, and it's wonderful to be on this podcast.
My first question to you is around access. Increasing inequality often means that women in the informal sector are left behind. We see this in the digital space too, with something as basic as access to technology. In a country like India, what is the gender digital gap that we are talking about? And is there reliable data available for the informal sector, particularly women workers?
To answer your question, Priyanka, there is reliable data. And what the data tells you is not really a happy story. The National Family Health Survey, which is a recent data set, also quite representative on a national scale in a diverse country like ours, shows a significantly larger gender gap in internet usage. What it suggests is that only 57% of the male population has ever used the internet. But in comparison, the female population statistic is really very, very woeful. It's just 33%. This gender divide, unfortunately, may never even be bridgeable. And that's because of the socioeconomic background, the socioeconomic antecedents of women in our context, and the ability of women to navigate the economy and society, which has a direct implication for how they access and navigate digital technologies. I would also like to say that digital capacity today is not just about having access to gadgets, it's not just about having access to the internet, but it is also about use. During the pandemic, we saw that there were a few ethnographic studies that established how the use of the internet by young boys really indicated that they were able to use the search function, they were able to access platforms that were opening up some kinds of job opportunities in even contexts of impoverishment, which is like, let's say, settings like slums, settings that are marginalized, etc. But girls from the very same settings were not really aware that they could use the mobile for opening up opportunities, for being able to get out of the vulnerable and marginal social contexts they have been trapped in. The data also tells you that over 60% women in 12 states and union territories have never, ever used the internet. And this is what the National Family Health Survey 1990 to 21 actually tells you. This is pretty shocking because we're saying that overall in the country context, already, women don't have adequate access. And then when you drill down, there are differences by states and union territories. So this kind of differential really shows that the country is not doing very well. And one has strong reason to believe that informal sector women workers really are the bunch that are getting left behind. And this is not at all good news. And we must also understand that digital inclusion is a very, very aspirational ideal. It's not simply about owning gadgets. So even if we were able to put gadgets in the hands of informal sector women, we would just barely have begun to do our job. And as an enabler of human rights, this idea of access should really be expanded on a very, very broad spectrum where we are linking directly ideas of digital inclusion to ideas of gender equality and empowerment.
Just like you said, the COVID-19 pandemic changed the face of the world as we knew it. It exacerbated all manner of inequalities. Suddenly, there was a digital transformation happening in the world where everything was going online. There was a boom in e-commerce, in platform services. But like you said, women in the informal sector got left behind. And in some senses, the digital space was mirroring the inequalities of the world at large. The UN has termed this the new face of inequality. How does one begin to address this? Where do we start?
Yeah, I think this is really the million-dollar question, because the question about women being left behind is not about how do you bring them back, but it is actually about the larger context of transformation. So I would say that this really requires a multi-pronged approach. And there is a role for policy, there is a role for ground level action, there is a role really for traditional sectors and policies in these sectors to be rebooted. And therefore, all of this has to be done at one and the same time. The initial promise of the internet was that by bringing us informational empowerment, by bringing us communicative capabilities, and by bringing us associational affordances, the internet is really going to create and galvanize new communities, right? It's going to really enable women and those situated at the margins of society to really embrace a new solidarity, embrace new opportunities, and act collectively towards their well-being and empowerment. Unfortunately, what we saw during the pandemic was that the internet was also a site that is fraught with sexism, misogyny, abuse, and violence. So in a certain very ironic sense, the promise of the internet has degenerated into a context where digital infrastructures of society, instead of creating equal opportunity, have also become part of social structures of exploitation. This truth or this truism, this writing on the wall really is about how as a society we can redefine the meaning of connectivity, the meaning of digital infrastructure, the meaning of what data and empowerment really actually stand for. So the first thing we could do is stop integrating women as passive subjects of a data society. So you have an Aadhaar ID, and many women want to have IDs, a farmer ID or a health ID, in addition to an Aadhaar ID, to belong in a scheme of things where governance is shifting, right? Now, this is wonderful. Women have to be included, but they cannot just be passively integrated into these schemes. What is needed instead is active participation of women's collectives as digital citizens having rightful claims over the digital space. What do I mean by this? We really need to have public policies for digital public goods, like UPI, for instance, right? We see that even pushcart vendors, fruit sellers, women who come to your door with their push carts having this little, scanning device. And so you can actually buy these groceries, your everyday fruits and vegetables from these pushcart vendors, and they are willing to use UPI now. Now, of course, this was digital inclusion by duress, right? Because of the pandemic and because everybody kind of went online, these shifts have taken place. But what we need is a systematic plan. India actually is a forerunner in the creation of these digital public goods like the Beam app, which is the gateway for Google Pay or Phone Pay or anything, right? And we also need sectoral approaches. We need to revamp the public health system and make sure that women's voices are heard in the ways in which informational systems can be designed so that information can reach women. Appointments can be made online, not just by the middle class, but also by women who are actually the recipients of public health services. We need a community focus. We need actually community consultations, ongoing audit of these digital infrastructures, which is not just a one-time activity, but like something that is baked into data policies and digital infrastructure policies as an ongoing requirement of these infrastructures for social audit in which communities can participate. This is the NREGS model, right? I mean, wages have to be equitably distributed under the scheme. They have to be rightfully audited and communities have to be consulted. And this has to be an ongoing process where social audit of the NREGS scheme is a mandated requirement which is baked into the scheme.
You spoke a little bit about the original promise of the internet or the opportunities of the internet. I'm quickly going to take you to Tapi, where Sangeeta Ben, a board member of the Megha Tribal Women Farmers Cooperative, says,
જ્યારે અમે અમારી સહકારી મંડળીનો પ્રચાર પ્રસાર વધારવામાં પ્રયાસ કરી રહ્યા છે ત્યારે સ્માર્ટફોન ખૂબ જ મહત્ત્વપૂર્ણ બની ગયો છે. ઇન્સ્ટા અને ફેસબુક જેવા વિવિધ પ્લેટફોર્મ દ્વારા અમે આગામી પ્રોજેક્ટ અને પ્રવૃત્તિ વિશે માહિતી પોસ્ટ કરીએ છીએ. મોબાઈલ દ્વારા અમે એવા સ્થળોએ પહોંચી શકીએ છીએ જ્યાં અમે રૂબરૂ ના પહોંચી શકીએ.
And I quote, "Now that we are trying to scale up things at our cooperative, a smartphone becomes very important. Through different platforms like Instagram and Facebook, we post information about upcoming projects and activities. And through the mobile, we are able to reach places where we otherwise wouldn't be able to." End quote. Like you said, the digital economy offers a myriad of opportunities, especially in terms of livelihood for informal women workers. And women need technology for the same reasons as men do, to market their products, to upskill for economic opportunities. What role can technology play in women's economic empowerment? Can collectives, for instance, be the route to work and income security along with social security in the digital economy?
Yes, of course. I think this is an important question. Even if the answers are going to take the long haul, I think it's about time that we started, because with respect to gender equality, it's never too late to start. We really badly need a world that's different, and we have to put gender equity right ahead. And I think this question from Tapi, from the woman member of Seva's cooperative about why economic participation is not a matter of choice, but actually a matter of right. And in the digital context, having that access to digital platforms is a non-negotiable, pretty much sums up, what may be the policy context's response to this entire question. Policies have to be able to give women public platforms such as Instagram, because Instagram is a private platform. The rules may change. Data may be locked up with this company. Women may not have access to this data. They may not be able to do the analytics that are required to be done to market better. On account of all of these constraints on private platforms that are public, we do need a government-funded public platform on which women can actually market. And this is not a big deal at all. Designing, a publicly accountable Instagram will not require huge resources. And I think that a technologically advanced country like ours can easily do it through public resources and public finance. And on this platform, we really need women to be able to build the data capabilities, right? And these capabilities are not about capacity. It's not about distributing phones to individual members in a cooperative. This is about the ability, like women have in Seva mastered or woman stirred, to crack the bank account, to crack loans, to be able to maintain the finances, just like that, to be able to build the institutional capabilities within their collectives, to use various rights to their logical point of empowerment, to the logical point of extension where the rights start making meaning to their own individual and collective lives. So this comprehensive approach to digital transformation for such women in their collectives could typically involve a bundle of things. One is legal guarantees that their data will not be abused by the market, by predatory insurance companies, predatory, marketers, right? That guarantee is important. They need personal data protection, guarantees from abuse, so that their data is safe. Secondly, also other kinds of economic, arrangements, so that the policies that we're talking about are not just about digital paraphernalia. It's about a fundamental change to the way the economy is conceptualized to make way for these collectives, to make way for a solidarity approach. And we're talking about a digital context in which older questions of care infrastructure are not going to go away, right? So while technology policy, e-governance policy for social security and welfare, which makes it easy, for women to register online and receive their social security through cash transfers, through accountable processes which women are able to scrutinize, parse open. In addition to all of this, the requirement that we will need some kind of preferential procurement policies from government for women cooperatives to be able to sell on these platforms, or for platform infrastructures to be preferentially onboarding women's cooperatives on, let's say, something typically like ONDC. Women, our government has come up with this public e-commerce protocols, right? And this is called ONDC. And we should have something preferential for women's collectives. Somewhere in the economy, you have to start making allowances and treat the rights of the solidarity economy frameworks and approaches as legitimate as, let's say, the capitalist system where startups really want to make it big. Unless you're able to create a policy scenario that regulates the capitalist economy, you're not going to allow for these digital businesses run by collectives like the one that we spoke about, like the one that Sangeeta Ben belongs to thrive and make good their dreams.
You did speak a bit about, big tech governing data. And over here, I wanted to speak a little bit about data governance. And can you tell us a little bit about the role of data co-ops, for instance, in data governance, and what would this mean for us?
I think that for a long time, the idea of data governance was very much restricted to enterprise level data governance. So businesses everywhere in the world were thinking about having like a person or a professional who's an expert inside the organization taking care of data flows, data processes, data management within the organization. Today, this concern is not just about an enterprise level concern, it is a society level concern. Whose data becomes a resource for who to exploit? That really is the fundamental question driving the big tech economy. And we have to take this question and completely dismantle the founding premises of this question and start at a new point. How can data drive public and social value? How can data be at the service of equity and social justice? So these are the new questions. It's really not how can data as a resource exclusively cater to a for-profit economy, right? So we have to balance that question with the public and social value questions. So then the business of data governance becomes an institutional question. It's not the question for smaller enterprises, bigger companies to manage, but it is really the question for parliamentary process. It's a question for people's voice. It's a question for society to determine what kind of data paradigm they need. What data should be collected, what data should not be collected. Once data is collected, how should it be treated? How should it not be treated? What kind of processing is ethical? What kind of processing is not ethical? Etc., etc. So this is a necessary process of data governance. Once you have this, you can actually, like the Kerala government has also been experimenting with different things, you can set up cooperatives, you can allow for data trusts to be registered, and the government can make way for different data communities to thrive within a framework of trust and security. And I would like ideally to see a data governance model which is a civic public model within which platform infrastructures are being provided, protocols are being provided by the state, but typically data communities which are businesses, enterprises run by women, run by marginal communities, run by maybe transport cooperatives, really. And these communities come together and they are able to use these public protocols to set up their own data trusts where even trusteeship between consumers and workers can actually be imagined. And this is not a pie in the sky. I think that this is quite doable, but we need very, very strong and decisive public policy support.
Thank you for that. Meenakshi Ben, who is manager of the Home Care Cooperative, a women's domestic work and care sector cooperative in Ahmedabad, says,
કોઓપરેટિવ તરીકે અમે બહેનોને જે રોજગારી આપીએ છીએ એમાં બે વસ્તુ ખાસ ધ્યાન રાખીએ છીએ. એક એનું મિનિમમ વેજીસ અને એક એની કાયમી રોજગારી. એ બે મુદ્દાને ધ્યાનમાં રાખીને અમે ભાવ નક્કી કરીએ છીએ. એટલે અમારો રેટ કદાચ બહારની કોમ્પિટિશનમાં વધુ પડે છે. જ્યારે બીજી સંસ્થાઓમાં એ લોકો બહુ લોઅર રેટની અંદર 2-3 સર્વિસ આપે છે અને બહેનોનું શોષણ વધારે થાય છે.
And I quote, "As a women's cooperative, we ensure minimum wages and regular income to our women workers. However, we see that some of our competitors offer the same services on digital platforms for a much lower price." End quote. The economy, as we know it today, thrives on a labor oversupply. How do you see this in a mostly digital world? And how can we keep labor, specifically women's concerns, at the center for platform-mediated services? And is it really even possible?
Yeah, I think that Meenakshi has framed the problems of the Indian economy very, very succinctly. In the same breath, she's able to talk about the larger macroeconomic problems and, this entire unemployment that confronts so many families, so many households. And at the same time, she wants to bring in the questions that pertain to the women she works with and pointing to the fact that decent work is an aspiration today that is also deeply tied to the rapid gigification, right, of the overall economy. It's not just the gig economy or the platform-mediated service economy that we are talking about, but even if you take, let's say, agriculture, in a few years, as agricultural labor or extended services that are connected to agriculture go platform, at that point, you will see that these intermediaries from the commercial sector kind of become the new contractors, the new mediators who wield a lot of power over women's destiny as workers. So these concerns that have been tackled in the literature broadly really scratch the surface only. They do not go into the deeper structural issues. Why do I say that? Because when we talk about women drivers who are employed by Ola or Uber, in fact, in the first instance, Ola and Uber will even deny that they are employed by them. And they will say, oh, no, they are just our contractors and, they're partner drivers, right? And this is a matter of deep contention. When you really have an employer who is negating, that employment relationship, where do you even begin to assert your rights? So we do need, I think, laws that revisit this new gig economy and laws that actually confer on women their basic status as workers. So this employment status question is a crucial question in the global south, in a country like India, and platform mediated work cannot actually be something so unusual that we start denying women their rights as workers. That's the first thing. The second is that flexi work is a myth, and in our context, when leisure and even the few minutes that you actually have, between, let's say, 2 rides as a driver is monitored by a platform, we're actually talking about new forms of exploitation that really have to be mapped, and that has to be the subject of, labor laws. We cannot have an algorithmic control being completely sidestepped as if, the older forms of worker-employer relationships are the only things to govern, right? So the possibility of regulation of platforms through their algorithmic apparatus, so scrutiny of this apparatus for the ways in which new forms of abuse and exploitation enter the labor market, is a very, very important thing. And actually, women like Meenakshi will come and give testimony to the innumerable forms of exploitation. The question is, who's listening, right? So I think that policymakers have a responsibility to listen to these things and then start structuring the gig economy so that rights are not eroded and older forms of rights don't completely collapse. We are actually seeing a situation today where platform employers are not willing to even contribute social security to the pot. And this, I think, is really going back on the social contract, and that's not really on. The second policy level task for women like Meenakshi and her peers in her group is to really start applying their minds to worker-owned platforms, to ask the government, okay, you're supporting big companies like Ola, but we have existed long before, Uber came into the country. So, what is your duty and obligation towards us, towards people who are thinking about alternative economies that are providing decent wages, decent working conditions on their own, right? These federations, these productive units in Seva are taking care of, part of the economy that actually should be the primary responsibility of the state. So under the circumstances, women are actually underwriting the responsibilities of the state, and the state really then owes them the basic public policies which can promote worker-owned platforms. So on the one hand, I would call for regulation and new labor conditions for guaranteeing decent work in the platform economy. And on the other, I would strongly call for public policy support for women like Meenakshi to be able to run their own worker-controlled platforms.
As you were speaking, I was just thinking about the fact that, you were talking a little bit about workers not being recognized as workers. And in fact, 30 years ago, when the Seva Cooperative Federation was set up, that was the concern of the informal economy at that time, that workers were not being recognized or were not on rolls as workers. And so the alternative was to kind of create worker-owned enterprises and worker-owned businesses, right? And 30 years later, in the digital economy, we're kind of seeing the same concerns, but in the digital economy. And we're talking about, worker-owned models, worker-owned platforms. And I think that's quite an interesting kind of parallel. My last question to you today is around, can the digital world be an equalizer? We spoke a little bit about inequality. We spoke a little bit about opportunities of the digital world. Do you see the digital world being an equalizer going forward?
Yes, I think we have no choice but to live with the power of hope. And I think that responsibility for someone like me who comes from an organization that likes to work for progressive public policy is even greater because the inspiration comes from women like Sangeeta or women like Meenakshi, right? I think organizations like Seva who have reinvented, this entire idea of economic equality, through walking the path, right? I think they provide so much inspiration that I feel that the technological affordances of this paradigm really have to be harnessed differently. And therefore, this dreaming towards technology as an equalizer is, I think, an important part of what we do. One way, I think, is technology, while it's not neutral, in the ways in which digital technologies are employed could result in impacts that decentralize power or centralize power. And all through this conversation, we've been talking about a situation where technology centralizes power. So I think in this quest for an equal world, we really have to redeploy technological solutions or solutions that are solutions in the making, because there is no one political social point where technology can deliver everything and constantly requires a revisitation. I think in this endeavor, we really have to look at the power of technology, digital technologies in particular, data technologies, to be able to decentralize control to the edges, to the marginal people on this planet whose autonomy, I think, really has to really go up. The second is that technology can also bring about inclusion in quite a radical way. We talk often about the ability of home-based workers to participate in the economy. And we have seen that during the pandemic, this possibility has become real for many people. But rather than condemn people to home-based work that is seen as second-tier work, where wages are lower, there is absolutely no regulation, etc., I think the inclusion that we talk about through this kind of asynchronous contributions or remote work, etc., can be brought into households where differently abled people, women who are older, who are not really as mobile, etc., can participate in the economy. And I think these are particularly, two important, disruptive or radical possibilities that come out of technology. And I think collective enterprises have a lot to gain. And I also think that collective enterprises, by their very presence in the local geography and through new kinds of solidarities online, can grow their power, right? I mean, they're not limited by geography, although they would like to be in the geography, connected to people, etc. They're not limited just by, I think, a physical presence. They're also able to embrace, I think, a larger membership in the world. So this, I think, is another potential. And I think a federation of cooperatives that's global, that's international, that comes together not to erase difference, but to operate through the richness of diversity of the local embedded collective. I think that's the kind of imagination that we need, where they can actually participate as a global cooperative federation that's an institutional mechanism, but respectful of diverse localities, diverse points, right? And this is not at all a pipe dream. Even as I speak, I feel energized by this idea, because I feel the presence of collectives like Seva. There are other collectives in Europe that would most gladly learn from Global South collectives. And I think women are showing the way, and they won't give up. And therefore, I think that this power of technology to be an equalizer is quite attainable. And it's a continuous fight and struggle. And I think we have every duty to be behind our sisters.
Thank you for such an insightful conversation, Anita. And I think as you spoke, I'm also feeling energized to kind of, there's so much to look forward to, and in some senses, there's so much work ahead, and in a lot of ways, it kind of reaffirms, I think, why we do what we do and why it's important that you do what you do.
Thank you so much, Priyanka, and it was such a pleasure.
If you enjoyed listening to this conversation, do share it with your friends and family. If you would like to collaborate with us, partner with us, or get in touch with our women's cooperatives, do write to us at communications@sevafederation.org. We'll be back with another guest and another conversation. Till then, stay tuned to In Solidarity.